Hi guys, welcome to Happy Visas. My name is Philip Port and today I'm going to be speaking a little bit about Lenin, a little bit about Adolf Hitler. I'm going to be speaking about why do wars happen. Later I'm going to be speaking about Gorbachev, the Minsk Agreement, free, what I think will go in it. A little bit on Saddam Hussein, a little bit on Colonel Gaddafi. I'm going to be explaining why do wars happen. Obviously it's just my opinion, could be wrong. But let's look at Lenin. Oh, what a masterpiece from the Germans, the Austrians. They gave Russia Lenin, and for the next 80 years they had communism. You know, I'm not a big fan of Lenin, but basically they did their job. The Germans picked up all the Russian commodities on the cheap because of socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it. Often paying with chickens and things like that. Obviously, you know, communism didn't really work that effectively. There was a lot of food shortages, and Europe for the 80 years took full advantage. So I think Lenin was very, very bad for the Soviet Union, for Russian Federation, USSR. I think he was, you know, a terrible consequence, let's say, of the times. I'm not saying that now. Russia's doing really well, as I've said in my many videos. Now let's look at Adolf Hitler. Why him? Why did the Americans the sponsor him? Well, as Winston Churchill said in his memoirs, the Americans never gave us anything for free in the Second World War. The Americans wanted the reserve currency as the dollar, not as the British pound. They wanted, you know, the shipping lanes, the shipping routes. So, you know, obviously big companies like Ford, General Motors, IT&T, Eastman Kodak, a lot of these big American companies sponsored Adolf Hitler. No coincidence that, you know, 10 years later there's a massive war in Europe. Whether they knew what they were doing, I don't know, but how convenient for the Americans. You know, they came in very late. You know, yes, they did lose a lot of soldiers. They lost 400, you know, good people, obviously, from America. You know, 400,000 soldiers died. But at the end of the day, you know, again, as Winston Churchill said, you know, they took everything from us. They took our gold, they took our commodities, they took our, you know, best, you know, inventions, let's say, best know-how. So as he said, we got nothing for free from the Americans from the Second World War. We paid for everything, and you got to take your hat off to the Americans for doing that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You know, our empire was coming to the end, and the American empire was starting. Now let's look at Saddam Hussein. You know, he was told to invade Kuwait, probably, you know, or at least encouraged to invade Kuwait. Then who paid for the liberation? You know, more than $1 trillion. So all the oil revenues that went from the West, or from anywhere in the world, that went to Saudi Arabia, was paid back in military aid. You know, the Europeans and the Americans, every bomb that they dropped, they were invoicing Saudi about $3 million. You know, so they were dropping bombs on mud huts. They didn't care if trucks got destroyed, because every truck that got destroyed, the Saudi Arabia paid for. So yeah, so the Second World War was obviously get the deficit back in order. We've got too much money going to Saudi Arabia, and that's my logic behind that. Now, what mistake did Colonel Gaddafi make? His mistake was, what he did wrong, you know, he was drilling for oil about 40 years ago and discovered water, and an abundance of fresh water in the ground, and he built reservoirs, underwater piping, so that he could feed the whole of North Africa. And what he was going to do is, you know, Africa would be able to support themselves. They wouldn't rely on, you know, food aid and things like that from, you know, we wouldn't need any more band-aids or whatever. They would be able to feed themselves. And then from on top of that, he started selling his oil not in dollars but in euros. That's a big no. So obviously the non-government organisations, the NGOs sponsored by the West, went to the young people and said, you need your freedom. And the young people said, yeah, oh yeah, we need our freedom, despite having one of the best standards of living based on purchasing power parity in Africa. And they're still in civil war now. They're still buying weapons, probably from the Russians, probably almost certainly from the Europeans and the Americans. So they're still in civil war. Thank you, America. Thank you, Europe. You've just totally devastated our country. To put it in perspective, there was no mortgages where you had to pay interest. If you bought a house and you went to the bank, they were not allowed to charge you interest in Libya. You got married, you got $50,000. The economy in Libya was booming. Now, I believe it's in total poverty. North Africa has not got the fresh water because Barack Obama, depleted it, bombed it with depleted uranium. So terrible situation in Libya now. So basically they got all the money back that they paid Saudi Arabia for the oil, for the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait. They stopped Libya exporting water to North Africa. They sent a message out to the rest of the world, look at what happened to Saddam Hussein, look at what happened to Colonel Gaddafi when they started selling their oil in euros. Now let's look at Gorbachev. Gorbachev, I thought he did a bad thing. Initially I thought he did a good thing. I believed the Western propaganda. I thought, Gorbachev is great. Then when I moved to Russia, I realised, well, actually he's not so great. And now I believe actually he's done a good thing. I look at, he did break up communism. He did stop it. He did stop socialism. And now what do we have? We have a thriving Russian economy. If he wouldn't have taken them steps, yes, it was hard for the people in the 90s. It was a terrible situation, horrible situation for Russians in the 90s. But if he wouldn't have taken them moves, if he wouldn't have listened to, Ronald Reagan, take down that wall, Russia wouldn't be where it is today. So I think the Americans and the Europeans are regretting that now. I think they wish they would have left, communism, because now they've got a thriving economy to compete with. Russia's exporting not just commodities, but it's exporting technology, it's exporting military hardware, it's exporting a lot of food, $35 billion worth of food. So Russia is absolutely booming, and now, so they don't have the headache of China anymore. They've got the headache of the economic power of Russia. And both these countries have got militaries to protect themselves. So it's not going to be like the situation in Iraq or Libya, where or most of the Middle East, where they can just wipe them out. So that's my opinion on that. Now, what do I think will go in Minsk Agreement 3? What do I think will go in there? Oh, in this deal, Russia's holding all the aces. I think it's probably almost coming to the end. It's the end game. I think Russia's won this war. You've got to look at, as I've said previously, you've got to look at, why did this happen? It happened because, you had a pro-democratic Ukrainian government that, wanted closer ties with Russia. That's a no-no for the West. So they had the Orange Revolution. And then when it happened again, you had the Maidan Revolution. So every time somebody pro-Russian got into power in the Ukraine, it didn't survive very long, unfortunately. Nuland was handing out cookies during Maidan on the streets. Bags of money was coming from the American embassy there. Common knowledge, everybody knows about it. Everybody knows what happened. It's well documented. So I think in Minsk Agreement 3, I think it'll just be this. The Russians will say, look, we want Luhansk, we want Donbass, we want to keep Crimea. So they're going to keep 4 regions of Russia. And how convenient for the Russians. It's got all that black soil, it's got all them rare earth metals. It's going to be a bonanza for the Ukrainians in eastern Ukraine, and obviously a bonanza for the Russian government. and rightly so, to tell you the truth. I mean, they've always, Eastern Ukraine was always part of Russia. It was given as a gift to Ukraine many years ago. I think it was Khrushchev who gave it. Obviously that was a big mistake, especially giving away Crimea. And so I think the Americans have shot themselves in the foot with Gorbachev. I think they should have left him. You talk about electoral interference, then the Americans spent $10 billion to get Yeltsin elected. $10 billion, well documented. Obviously he then bowed down to the West. He did what he was told because he was a puppet. And then we've got Putin in power. Obviously he gets a bad press because he's doing what is good for Russia, not what is good for the West. So that our propaganda machine doesn't like him. And that's how wars happen, guys. That's what I think will go in Minsk agreement free. I think nothing will go in it. I think it will just be like, guys, we're not going to have any more agreements. We've won the war, we've won the battle. Put your UN peacekeepers there. We're going to keep the eastern parts of Ukraine that we've liberated or we've taken over, and that's what I think will happen. Has the West been weakened? I don't think they've been weakened that much. I think they live on war. I think they're gonna look at China now. I think now they've got Ukraine off their plates. They'll try and get a good business deal out of it. And I think they'll focus on China now, weakening China, trying to destroy China. And to do that, they need the West needs the Russians on their side. Who's the biggest exporter of commodities to China? Is the Russians. And if they start exporting military technology, then the Chinese can quite easily compete with the Americans. And this is a big fear for the Americans and the Europeans. Would Russia give China the technology it needs to fight a fair war in the Pacific or on the Strait of Taiwan? And I think that's what America's looking at now. I think they're looking at economic war. They've just taken the shipping lanes in Central America. I forgot the Panama Canal. Sorry, I've lost it. So they've just taken the Panama Canal. That's really pissed off the Chinese. They're thinking about taking Greenland. So I think America will be content with that. They're also thinking about buying all the shipping ports, and if they get hold of the shipping ports, that's good night Vienna for the Chinese, because they're going to put massive tariffs on any shipping port that a Chinese ship lands in. And to tell you the truth, it's not such a bad policy actually, because the Chinese have trillions of treasury bonds. I mean, and America can never pay them back. But by taking these policies, maybe it can. If the economy starts to do well, it's actually a win for China, because it has valuable treasury bonds that it can cash in. But anyway, guys, that's my views, that's my thoughts. I'm not saying I'm right. I believe I am right. Guys, please please subscribe. Very soon I'm going to be putting Buy Me a Coffee down below. I don't get paid for these videos. Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.